Hello my friends and welcome to the channel. This August, anyone who wanted to had the chance to play Battlefield 6 over 2 separate open beta weekends. And while I'm a bit late to the party on getting my thoughts out on this one, I figured I'd put up a quick video talking about my experience with BF6, what I liked, what I felt could be improved, and whether I'm actually looking forward to playing it when it launches in October. Before I get into my thoughts on BF6 specifically, I want to quickly talk about my history with Battlefield so you know my perspective on the series as a whole. I played 1942 a bit as a kid on dial-up internet, and I played Battlefield 2 on vacations at my cousin's house back in the early 2000s every now and then, but my first real entry point into the series, as it seems to be with a lot of people, was Battlefield Bad Company. I have so many good memories of specifically playing Bad Company 2 with the boys. The maps were great, the destruction was in a league of its own at the time, and there was no real competition in that regard. There was tons of stuff to unlock and play around with in the game, and it really felt like there was kind of something for everyone who wanted to play it. I played Battlefield 3 and 4 a little bit, but not nearly as much as Bad Company 2. And I honestly have sort of a weird feeling about missing the boat on BF3 and 4. They became the bar against which every Battlefield and every game like it going forward would be measured. And because I didn't really play them, I felt like I was missing so much context that I kind of didn't get an opinion on Battlefield anymore. Fast forward to 2016 and a few of my friends talked me into getting Battlefield 1, and to my surprise, I was immediately hooked by that game. Apparently it's a controversial statement to some, but I thought Battlefield 1 was an absolute banger of a game, and I still hold it up as one of the most cinematic and immersive FPS games that I've ever played. But after that, I kinda went dark on Battlefield until just a few weeks ago when I decided to try out the Battlefield 6 beta because I was just looking for something new to play while honestly feeling burnt out on everything else in my game library. The first beta weekend honestly really didn't do it for me. There was some really bad networking and hit detection, and I didn't really play enough to get a good feel for the maps or the flow of the game, so I was kind of just aimlessly spawning and dying over and over again. However, when I saw it pop up for the second beta weekend, I figured I would give it a shot with some friends this time, and I'm quite glad that I did, because I had a lot of fun and I walked away from that second beta feeling like BF6 is actually something I could see myself maybe sinking some time into. It's not perfect, and I definitely have my issues with how the weapons feel, and how it feels like they're almost scared to commit to the large-scale warfare that made the series famous to begin with, but I had some solid fun playing the game, especially with a squad of friends. So let's start with something that I liked about the game. The first easy point that BF6 scores is in the graphics department. It's a very good-looking game all around, but specifically for me, the effects from explosions, gunshots, and destruction on the environment are just awesome, and they contribute a lot to immersion. The way that explosions and gunshots kick up dust, shrapnel, and debris just adds a lot to the chaos and the immersion when you're fighting against a bunch of guys across the street from you. I think that these effects are especially good on maps like the Siege of Cairo and Iberian Offensive, which are in sandy, dusty, desert locations. When something explodes, there's this big cloud of dust that pops up and slowly settles along with all the bits of stone and wood splinters flying around. Even when nothing in the environment is actually being destroyed, the explosions still look great, and all these extra effects add a lot of weight to something as simple as a grenade blowing up in an alleyway. The actual full-on building destruction is also pretty cool, though I do think it feels a little bit too scripted sometimes. Buildings seem to just take X number of hits and then kind of just collapse in a predetermined way, which is really quite immersive and crazy when it happens in the middle of an intense firefight, but it does look kind of cheesy when you pay too much attention to it or if you're sitting back and it's like the only thing on your screen. But since most of the time when this stuff happens, you're too distracted by staying alive to really overanalyze what's going on, it still works pretty well, and I had a lot of fun blowing buildings up with RPGs and C4 while I was playing. Next up, I will say that I really appreciate BF6 getting back to a modern war setting. I'm not a big fan of the near future setting of 2042 or things like COD Black Ops, And as much as I love the historical settings, us gamers have played too many World War II shooters. We do not need another couple hundred hours of M1 Garand gameplay. At least most of us don't. That being said though, I dislike the fact that they took the path of least resistance and made the two teams into a generic bad guy faction and a generic good guy faction. I get it, they wanted to sell the game worldwide and they want to avoid awkward news headlines, so it's just easier to have NATO as the good guy and generic dudes of no particular nationality in black balaclavas as the bad guys. But I can't help but think about how much more personality each faction could have if they could actually take inspiration from different nations' militaries for the outfits and the weapon selection. And while we don't really have a lot of context on the story mode so far, I'd be willing to say, like, straight up, it would be a more interesting story if it was actually involving real nations and real places and like have real stakes instead of just NATO versus bad guys. But anyways, when it comes to the gameplay, overall I enjoyed this as a more casual war game. It kind of wraps the aesthetics and immersive qualities of a milsim game around the more fast-paced and fluid gameplay of an arcade shooter, and I think it works pretty well. I really do enjoy games like Squad and Arma, but sometimes more complex military simulation type games can just be a chore to play. You log on with this idea of how you're gonna have fun, but then sometimes you can end up playing a 90-minute game of Squad where you spend 75 of those minutes running back and forth across a field and not really doing anything. Battlefield 6 is sort of the opposite, where you almost can't go more than a few seconds without an encounter. This is a problem of its own sometimes, where it feels like you never have time to think and regroup and execute cool plans because you're just constantly in fight or flight mode, but it still undeniably keeps you focused on the action and constantly engaged, which is a good thing for the most part. I think a big contributor to this though is that in the beta we were only able to play on small and medium-sized maps, which means that every player is crammed together and constant gunfights are kind of inevitable. I was kind of shocked to learn that at launch BF6 will only have 3 large-sized maps, and only 9 total, at least as far as we know. The cynical part of my brain wants to say that they're almost scared to go all in on the big maps with combined warfare and vehicles for fear of scaring away players from other FPS games that they are clearly hoping can be converted into Battlefield players. They can make the movement and gunplay as arcade inspired as they want, but if you stick a movement gamer in an open field against a tank too many times, they will be pretty quick to hit that uninstall button. And that's clearly something they're trying to avoid. I feel like the developers are trying really hard to find a compromise between a large-scale tactical war game and an arcade reaction-based FPS. I think overall they're doing a pretty good job, but I do worry that it might end up so compromised that it doesn't fully appeal to anyone actually. If it ends up too fast and loose, wargamers won't want to play it. And regardless of how good the movement or gunplay is, I think movement gamers or modern FPS players in general are tough to sell on large-scale, open-ended shooters with vehicle combat. I don't think I'm making my point very eloquently, but basically what I'm saying is there's a real risk that trying to make BF6 appeal to both war gamers and movement gamers might leave it in a position where neither side really feels like the game was actually made for them, and then the game just does not have a core audience. Moving on to part of the gameplay that I do have more specific thoughts on though, let's talk about the guns in Battlefield 6 for a bit. Now overall, I will say that the weapon models are pretty nice. As someone who obsessively played Tarkov for the last 5 years, even I don't really have too much to complain about when it comes to the look of the weapons. However, I do feel like Battlefield 6 kind of falls into the same trap that every other AAA shooter does, where all of the weapons just seem to be designed to point at something and hold down the trigger. Nothing is designed to actually be used in semi-auto, and it seems like everything from the weapon damage numbers to the recoil and time to kill are all designed around full auto first and foremost. Is that a bad thing? I think any answer to that question is an opinion, but in my opinion, I don't love it. From a gameplay standpoint, it's more interesting to me to have to actually adjust your firing pattern depending on distance. And I think weapons can have way more variety when some get to trade full auto control for much cleaner precision kills. I also feel like for some weapons, the visual recoil didn't feel like it matched up with the fire rate of the weapon, and it just felt kind of unnatural to compensate for the recoil, especially on high rate of fire weapons like SMGs and the M4. I will also say that the attachment selection feels a little bit lackluster, and maybe that's my Tarkov privilege speaking because I played a game that had thousands of attachments for so long. Not having any additional handguards or stocks for the rifles specifically seems like a real missed opportunity, especially considering even games like Call of Duty now let you swap out more parts than Battlefield. And even if they had no stats tied to them, just like the visual appeal of being to change out the stock or handguard on your rifle to personalize it a little bit, I think is a huge deal for a lot of gamers. The foregrips and sights also felt like they're just pulling from kind of a dated pool of attachments, especially for a game that's supposed to be set in the current year. But I have no way of knowing how much stuff is in the game that we just didn't get to see in the beta. You could also argue that since we're supposed to be playing as regular grunts, we don't get the fancy stuff, but I don't know if that's a real argument that anyone would make. After the weapons, we might as well talk about the classes, and here I will have to say that I basically only played Engineer because Engineer has always been my favorite Battlefield class, so I can't really say a lot about the other classes. The Engineer felt quite fun to play, though I didn't really use the SMG, I very quickly switched to the carbines. The RPG and the Stinger both felt very useful, and the top-down anti-tank mine was actually really fun to play around with once I figured out how you could place it around corners that tanks would have to drive by instead of like in the path of the tank. As an Engineer main, I did honestly feel like vehicles seemed to be pretty easy to deal with, as long as you had like a little bit of coordination with your squad. If you could just get your boys to suppress the other engineers for like 30 seconds, it was really no problem to get a side shot or a back shot on a tank and destroy it in like 2 hits. I honestly felt bad for the aircraft pilots as well. It seems like all it took was 2 engineers in a server with a couple of functioning brain cells between them and a Stinger, and aircraft didn't even get to make it out of their spawn before blowing up. It honestly kind of felt unfair. Maybe I'm just a good engineer, or maybe the other teams I was playing against just all happened to suck with vehicles, but I really did feel it was quite easy to take out vehicles if you really committed to it. In general, it felt like every class kind of had their thing, and when I played in a full squad, we really did feel like we got a good benefit from having one of each class in the squad. Support is the enabler that keeps you all going. Assault is a great compromise for people who just want to shoot stuff. Recon added a lot of utility, especially with the spawn beacon, which I'm honestly kind of sad is being moved off the class. And engineers made sure that vehicles and the structural integrity of your enemy's cover was never a problem for your squad. Like I said before, I didn't play other classes too much, but what I will say is that I initially started on the servers with no locked weapons, and after switching over to the locked weapon servers, I don't think I'll ever go back to the other ones. The two experiences were just night and day difference. On open weapon servers, it felt like every player was just using the G36 or one of the LMGs, and every gunfight was just the same. Locked weapons just felt better as a Battlefield game, like every class actually had to stick to their roles or compromise and take a carbine, which generally has some sort of drawback. I highly encourage players to stick to the locked weapon playlists, and I would love to see the developers make the locked weapons playlist the default choice for quick match. Overall, I can honestly say that I had quite a bit of fun with Battlefield 6, but I'm not so blinded by a few hours of entertainment that I'm going to sit here and tell you to run out and pre-order the game right now. I haven't really played a casual shooter like this in a long time, so for me it really did feel like a breath of fresh air. I can't really get into modern Call of Duty titles, and it seems like every casual shooter is set on being like a fast-paced arena-style game. So realistically, Battlefield 6 is kind of the only AAA developed casual war game that will be releasing anytime soon. And while I did enjoy the second week of the open beta, the fact that full release only has 9 maps and only 3 of those maps are large maps just feels off to me. We're also relying on a lot of promises about keeping the game grounded visually, and we have no way of knowing how long they will stick to that before the allure of making $1 billion off a Post Malone skin or something becomes too tempting for the devs to resist. Do I think BF6 is some new milestone in AAA shooter development? No. Does it set a new bar for milsim war games? No again. But it does seem to at least be on the right track to being a real compromise between the fast-paced arcade shooter and the slow, methodical war game. However, like I said before, the biggest risk of any compromise is that it might end up not meeting the expectations of either side. And unfortunately, we have no way of knowing how it will really end up until we have both put our money and time into it. So that wraps up my rambling about Battlefield 6 for the time being. But I'm quite interested in your thoughts on the game, so let me know how you felt about the BF6 beta down in the comments. Thanks for checking out the video. If you enjoyed this commentary, I have a link to my Twitch stream in the description, so feel free to drop by and come say hi. I'll hopefully catch you on the next one, and stay safe out there, everyone.